All right, so then the most advanced plants are the seed plants. These are plants that produce pollen and a seed, and there's two groups of them. They're the gymnosperms and the angiosperms. And so we're going to describe the advantages of pollen and seed plants, and then we'll talk about the two groups, the conifers, and then particularly the flowering plants, which are the most diverse plants and the dominant plants. And we'll talk about the advantages of fruit and how these plants form partnerships with animals. Okay, so seed plants produce true seeds. What is a seed? Well, a seed contains the embryo, the developing sporophyte plant part of the plant, which will become the dominant form. It also contains stored food, the endosperm, which will allow the plant to get a good start. And so here you see the embryo, which includes the cotyledons. Those are the developing future leaves. The radicle, which will be the future root, and then you see the endosperm and the micropyle there, and then the seed coat. One of the great things about seeds is that the seed goes into dormancy, and so it can survive long periods, years and years and years before germinating. And that happens because of a hormone that turns it into that ABA, abscisic acid, and then also because of the seed is dehydrated. Um, um, see, some of the seed plants have fruits. Those are the angiosperms that can help with dispersal of the plant. And lots of coevolution happens between plants and animals for these. Pollen, all the seed plants produce pollen, which allows um, the male gametophyte to be transferred and fertilization to occur without being dependent on water. So the seed is just an embryo, and it's protected. Okay. All right. The first big group of seed plants are the gymnosperms. These are plants with naked seeds. They don't have fruits. There are four living groups: the conifers, the cycads, the gnetophytes, and the ginkgophytes or ginkgos. Okay. All of these plants lack flowers and fruits of angiosperms. What they have are cones. And in the cones, one type of cone, you have the microgametophyte that produces pollen. And these are the smaller cones. These are just modified leaves that are on a stem. And then the larger cones are the female cones. Have the megagametophyte, where there's an ovule, and the ovule is just protected by a little leaf or the scale. Okay, probably the best known groups of these are the coniferous trees: pines, spruces, firs, redwoods, sequoias. These are very, very large, long-lived plants. They can be taller. The tallest plants we know are conifers. They're well adapted to dry environments. Um, they're well adapted to cold environments. Include the longest living plants, the bristlecone pine. Okay, um, they produce a soft wood because they have a xylem that's not as hard as what you find in some of the angiosperms. Okay, another group of gymnosperms are the cycads. The cycads were formerly very dominant in the Mesozoic area, the age of the dinosaurs. These were very tall plants in that time. They grow from a kind of a woody trunk, and then they have a whorl of leaves with very large cones. There are still plenty of cycads around. They're common ornamental plants. They look very palm-like. Then there are some kind of smaller groups of these guys, the gnetophytes. These are they're thought to be kind of closely related to angiosperms, possibly because their xylem has not only the tracheids, but it also has the vessels, and so it produces a truer xylem tissue. Although these guys aren't woody, there are only a handful of species here: the Welwitschia, the ephedra, and the gnetum. The ephedra is probably the best known because it produces amphetamine-like compounds. but they're not abundant. But again, they're nice conifers. They produce the cones. And then Ginkgo biloba is the only living species in this group. They do have flagellated sperms, but they still produce cones, and these are dioecious. They have separate male and female plants, and they're on different trees. They're commonly planted ornamental because they can withstand pollution, and so you see them a lot. And the female trees are stinky. Okay, then the last group of plants are the angiosperms. These are the flowering plants. It includes the monocots and the dicots or eudicots. These are most familiar plants. This is the largest group of species, well over 200,000 different species, almost 300,000. Most food plants that we eat are angiosperms. Both monocots and dicots are important food plants. They're the dominant plants we see in most environments. They produce flowers, they produce fruits. Their life cycle is kind of around these flowers. The dominant form of the plant is the sporophyte, and the sporophyte develops flowers, which is a modified whorl of leaves, actually several whorls of leaves. There's the sepals and then the petals, and then inside the petals you have usually male and female structures. An ovary develops within a series of structures called the carpel, and that's going to contain the female gametophyte, the megagametophyte. And so you'll get an egg developing within there, and including some additional cells, the polar nuclei, which will develop in the endosperm. And then in the stamen, there's a filament and anther. That's where the microgametophyte develops, and these are where the sperm will form. They'll form within the pollen grains, and the pollen can be transported either by the air or by an animal, and it will wind up sticking to the top of the carpel, and then the pollen, one of the cells within there will form a pollen tube, which will grow into the carpel, and then the sperm can move down that tube, and pollen will fertilize the egg. Okay. Flowering plants also develop fruits, and so you get a double fertilization. So you get, here you can see the pollen grain hits the carpel, and then the pollen tube grows into the all the way down to the ovary, and the egg cell will be fertilized by a pollen grain, and that will develop into the embryo. But you'll also get sperm fertilizing the polar nuclei, and this will form the endosperm, and that will be a triploid point of that. And so the seed will contain both the new sporophyte that's developing. It will contain endosperm that's made from this triploid fertilization of the sperm and polar nuclei. And then part of the seed will be a coat that's produced by the old sporophyte plant. And so you'll have that seed coat there. And then the seed will often develop within a fruit, which is the ovary tissue will thicken and produce a fruit that may be able to attract an animal that will eat the fruit and then disperse the seed. Okay, or the fruit may develop into something like a winged-like structure that will carry the seed in the wind. Okay, the two groups of angiosperms are the monocots and the dicots. They differ in that the embryo within the seed develops differently in them. In the monocots, there's a single cotyledon or a single leaf structure that will develop into the leaf. In dicots, there will be two of these structures. And in addition to this, there's many other differences. Monocots produce long, narrow leaves that have parallel venation, so the leaf veins all go in the same direction. The dicots tend to produce broadleaf plants where there's a branching network of veins. They differ in their vascular structure, their vascular tissues. In monocots, the vascular tissues are scattered randomly throughout the stem. In dicots, they occur in a bundle. The flowers differ. differ usually in the monocots, the flower parts. There'll be 3 sepals, 3 leaves, 3 stamen, things like that. In dicots, usually it's multiples of 4 or 5. When we think of monocots and dicots, there's also other additional things in the root structure and pollen structure and things like that. But monocots, think of grasses, think of lilies, think of orchids. Those are all monocots. Important food plants like corn, wheat, and rice, sugar cane. These are all monocots. Dicots include things like most hardwood trees like oaks and hickories and cherries. These are all dicots. Dicots include all the vegetables and most vegetables and fruit plants that we eat: apples, pears, cherries. These are all fruits that, of course, are going to be dicots. Um, let's see. Our monocot plants don't produce true wood. There are some of these that produce wood-like structures, like the palm trees, but dicots do produce true wood and hardwood. With coniferous plants, those are producing softwoods. Okay, so we'll stop there. A good run through the seed plants.